Welcome to the First Presbyterian Church of Englewood, a community committed to live boldly, share boundlessly, grow community, and build God's world. Please visit us in person or at englewoodpres.org.
Well, friends, our scripture lesson today is taken from the Gospel according to Luke chapter 15, verses 1 through 10. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to him. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So he told them this parable. Which one of you, having 100 sheep and losing one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? When he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders and rejoices. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, "Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost." Just so, I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. Or what woman, having 10 silver coins, if she loses one of them, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? When she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, "Rejoice with me, for I have found the coin that I had lost." Just so, I tell you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Well, as I mentioned at the start of the service, we talked about for a couple of weeks, this is the first week of a 4-week series called How to Be Happy. And so that's going to be our topic. But as we begin this topic, I wanted to take a second and talk to you about that word happy. Because a lot of these words have different connotations in English. And sometimes you'll hear Christians, well-meaning Christians, say, well, you know, the goal should be joy, not happiness, as if happy is somehow more shallow than the idea of joy. But if we go back to the roots of this word, I want to take a look at a word in Greek, and this word is makarios. The word makarios in Greek is a word that can be translated as happy, but most often it's translated as the word blessed. And you hear it in things like, blessed are the peacemakers, blessed are the poor, okay? That word there, it can also be happy. And there are some English translations of the Bible that translate it that way. You know, happy are the peacemakers. And what this kind of points out to us, I think, is the idea that happiness is connected to this feeling of blessedness, all right? These two words are basically the same thing in the Greek, the blessed and the happy. And so there's a connection linguistically in that word in the scriptures between the idea of being happy and feeling blessed. And so today I want to talk about one of the ways in which we get cut off from this feeling of being blessed, where we get cut off from that, and that cuts us off from being happy. And this is something that's important enough that this word, makarios, shows up about 30 times in the Gospels, about 50 times in the New Testament overall. So clearly this is something that is important to God and important for us to learn about. But where I want to start on this idea of cutting us off from that feeling is to go back to the very beginning of this passage. So Jesus is having dinner, he's having a meal, and he's with folks, and it says tax collectors and sinners. And you need to understand how much they don't like these folks, all right? And why, by the way, why those are two separate groups. So the Jewish people were under the boot of the Roman Empire, and tax collectors were viewed as instruments of empire. So the tax collectors were hitting them up for inordinate revenue, and that revenue was going to fund Rome. So when they saw a tax collector, and the tax collectors were from among the people, so they were nominally Jewish themselves, what they saw them as traitors to their own people. They had chosen a profession where they were instruments of their own people being oppressed. Okay, so that's why they hated tax collectors, because not only were tax collectors often abusing their position, all right, they would abuse their position financially, because the Roman system was basically, if you're a tax collector, you have to give a certain revenue to us. You owe us a certain revenue. And by the way, if you're able to extract more from the people, you get to keep it. That's why they ended up being rich. So, you know, can you imagine if the IRS worked on commission? Okay, what would that do to us? And then that revenue was going to fund the Roman Empire's oppression of their people, and that's why they hated them so much. And then there was the sinners. The sinners were the folks who were nominally Jewish but just refused to keep Jewish law. Okay, and so those are the two groups that are there. And the Pharisees and the scribes are really unhappy that Jesus chooses to be in their presence. And so it says that they're grumbling. And Jesus, hearing the grumbling, decides to tell them a couple of stories. Tells them stories about a shepherd who loses a sheep and goes to find it, a woman who loses a coin and goes in search of it within her house. And then he says, look, when they find what they're losing, when they find what they've lost, they call their friends and say, rejoice with me. Rejoice with me. Be happy that I have found what was lost. So I want to just frame what we're talking about today in terms of a really simple opening question. Are you a grumbler or a rejoicer? What's your instinct? Are you a grumbler or are you a rejoicer? You know, how do you react when you see something good happen to somebody else? You know, are you truly happy? Do you grumble? Why did it happen? I can't believe, I deserve it more than they do, okay? Or are you, well, I think a lot of us kind of fall into the, I'm happy for them. We know we're supposed to be happy for them, so we say we're happy for them. We're not really sure we're really happy for them, okay? Are you a grumbler or a rejoicer? And a lot of that, stems from these questions of what do we think we deserve? What do we think we're entitled to? What do we think that is supposed to happen to us? Like, Jesus, when he tells that story about the sheep, he says something that's pretty plain. He says, look, the shepherd leaves the 99. I always thought, that's kind of an interesting idea because that's kind of what's happening, all right? He leaves the 99. Now, we know that the sheep don't have particular feelings, but if you, just have them as a stand-in for the people, if you were one of the 99 sheep, it's easy for you to be thinking, why'd the shepherd leave? Why did he leave us? Does he not care about us? We're the good sheep. We stayed together. We stayed where we were supposed to be. And he leaves us to go after that one stupid, disobedient sheep who ran off and got himself lost. And sure, when that sheep is lost, he's probably going to get eaten by a wolf or something like that. But you know what? He deserves it. He left. Meanwhile, what do we get for being here? What do we get for staying together? It's so easy to think that way in life. It's so easy to think that, I followed the rules. I did what I was supposed to. And it just seems too often like people who didn't got ahead. And somehow that just seems wrong. And so we start to feel resentment. We start to feel resentful. And resentment is an emotion that is rooted in a sense of injustice, okay? It's rooted in a sense of unfairness. Resentment comes when we start thinking, boy, I deserve this and someone else got something that they didn't deserve. It wasn't fair. But the problem with resentment is that resentment starts to see everything in terms of us, right? That's what happens when people are resentful. They're seeing everything in terms of their own situation. It wasn't fair to me. I was not treated as well as I should have been. And when you start to focus in on yourself, that's where so many problems come about, and that's where so much of our faith is directed at telling us that keeping yourself focused on you is going to lead to being unhappy. It's going to lead from you being disconnected from other people, disconnected from God, when you start to focus on yourself. But it's so easy to have this happen. Like there's a political issue out there right now that I don't really have an opinion on per se, and so I can talk about it. But what's interesting is this. So I'm not sure exactly what we should do. There's good arguments for one or the other, and it's this question about, should we forgive student loans? Okay? So you've heard proposals about that. Should we forgive student loans? All right? And so you hear that, and you have people saying, oh, it's too expensive, we can't afford it. You have other people saying, but our young people are being crushed by the cost of college, we need to do it. And there are arguments on both sides about what to do. But what do I hear really often in that discussion? I hear a person who says, I didn't get my loans forgiven. Here's the thing. You can argue that it's a good thing to do. You can argue that we can't afford it. Irrelevant to the argument is whether you had your loans forgiven. Okay? That is not relevant to the argument of whether we should. Maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. But it's not relevant to say, I had to pay my loans off. And we hear that all the time. We hear it in churches. In churches it happens. So many churches have had this thing of now it's really necessary to provide child care for folks because people have a hard time getting child care to come to events. And sometimes you'll have members who are a little older, they go, when I was younger and had my kids, I had to get a babysitter. I didn't have it. So they use their experience, their negative experience, as an argument to perpetuate the negative experience. It's like, I had a really hard time, and I want to give the people following me a really hard time too. Okay? And so, but that comes out of this idea of otherwise it's unfair, otherwise there's injustice, otherwise someone else is getting what I didn't get. And when we feel that way, we get cut off from the feeling of blessedness. And that's going to keep us from ever being happy, because we will always find those circumstances where we didn't get it as good as someone else. Instead, what Jesus is saying, these are such important words here, so simple. Rejoice with me. That when we see that good fortune happening to someone, we rejoice. He says, rejoice with me. Stop grumbling and rejoice with me. Now, how do you do that? How do you get to a place where you start to rejoice? And it's really simple, I think. It's hard to do. It's a lot of things in life are both simple to analyze and hard to do, right? Okay, so, and this is, attitudinal things are one of those things. It's really simple to analyze, hard to do. But when you see that thing happening that is good for somebody that maybe they didn't deserve, they didn't work for, all right? To be joyful about it is to focus on it as mercy, not as unfairness. To see it as mercy, okay? It's a mercy, all right? And what is mercy? Mercy is unmerited, right? Okay? It's unmerited. We get mercy from God. We didn't deserve it, but we got it. It's unmerited from God. But you know what's also unmerited typically? Or unexpected at least? Joy. Okay? I mean, when we do something and we expect it to be good and it's good, we're satisfied. Okay? You go to a restaurant, you're expecting a good meal, and you know what you're going to get, and you get exactly what you were expecting. It's good. We're joyful when it's unexpected, right? We're joyful when it's over and above. We're joyful when it's better than what we thought it was going to be. We didn't plan on it, so we didn't deserve it. It's not merited. It just happened, okay? So when we look at these things that happen, these incidents of good fortune, and you sit there and go, they didn't deserve it. Go, isn't that great? Isn't it wonderful that that happened, that we would see that undeserved blessing not as unfairness in the world, but as mercy in the world? All right? Because the more we do that, the more we will see the world in a different frame of mind. Okay? See, I think one of the things that's really important about our own happiness is the way we understand the world to be, all right? I mean, what's a cynical person? A cynical person goes around and what they see is everybody out there is out for themselves. Everybody in the world is trying to cheat them. Everybody, when you have that frame of mind, you become cynical, right? Or you can have a frame of mind that sees people as basically good, people as basically worthy, all right? And the way your worldview is shaped changes your attitude about everything, okay? I think that when we talk about being happy, one thing you'll hear people say is, well, you need to count your blessings. And that's true. I think you do need to count your blessings. But I think what really changes our frame of mind in looking at the world is when we count everyone's. Because when we're not just looking at our own blessings, but we're counting everyone's, it changes our understanding of how the world works. That if we look at these instances of unmerited favor, of mercy, of blessing that is out there in the world, when you see everyone's blessings, it'll actually make it easier for you to see your own. When you see everyone's blessings, it'll not only then be easier to see your own, but then you will begin to see the world as a place of blessing. You begin to see all the blessings around you and go, you know what? There's a lot of blessing in the world. There's a lot of mercy in the world. There's a lot of goodness in the world. I think that's why sometimes on Facebook people love to share stories of just people doing a good deed. They love to do that. Those things will go viral so quickly just when you see that story. Or sometimes you just see, I saw one the other day, it was so cute. It was a cat that was basically like playing with a bird. Not playing with it like as in toying with it before dinner. It was just, it was having fun. It saw it as a friend and it was just playing. And I think when we see things like that in the world, it's inspiring and we love to share those things because it helps us understand that maybe the world isn't quite as horrible and harsh as we saw it before. And when we begin to see everyone's blessings, we begin to see more of our own. And we begin to understand that the world is a more benevolent place than maybe we thought it was before. And that having that shift in our attitude is a key to being happy. Because when we're cut off from that feeling of blessedness, when we're cut off from the idea that blessing can happen to us, and we will be cut off from it if we can't see it happening to others, we won't be happy. So, in this first week of the series, I just want to start by saying we need to go out into the world and see blessing and appreciate it and be happier for it, to be a person who rejoices rather than a person who grumbles when we see what looks like unmerited favor. Because that's what God is all about. Unmerited favor, unmerited grace, unmerited mercy. And if we see unmerited mercy as a bad thing, we will be like the Pharisees, who saw the tax collectors and the sinners and said, they have not done what they should do to deserve God's favor, and they grumbled. Or we can take that same situation and say, they have not done what they should have done to deserve God's favor, and God showed it anyway. Praise be to God. Amen.